Don't call my name, Alejandro. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Bend your vintage hardware.
Scammers.
And Amiga takes max damage.
All this and more coming up on this week's 200th show. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech. Hello, everyone. 200 shows. How did we get here? How did it happen?
One by one.
Yeah, one by
step.
Every week.
Dave, do you want to make introductions today? Because we are joined by special guests.
It's Aaron.
Oh, that's so creepy, Dave.
That's really creepy.
I have, for audio listeners, I have a full-size printout of Aaron wearing a Santa hat, because he should be wearing a Santa hat.
The more disturbing thing to me is I was under the desk. I don't like that.
I think Dave sleeps in that room.
Get me out of there, Dave.
You were on top of the desk. Don't worry. You were on top of the desk.
Thank God.
You were playing my Atari ST. You were playing faster on my Atari ST. Were you having fun?
That printout comes from the Amigos in the cave. So Aaron was there as a life-size cutout while Boat did a show there with us. We're, of course, joined by Chris, our occasional host of This Week in Retro.
Occasional host, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
nice.
You can have an occasional jacket. I'm the occasional host. Yeah, that's great.
I'm going to keep my weekly update short because we have two guests, so it'd be nice to hear from them. All I'm going to say is big shout out to our biggest fan, Jessica, who was in the cave this week, telling me how she listens to This Week in Retro every week with her dad. I think that's willingly and not forced to listen to us. So I promised her a shout out. Shout out to Jessica.
Hello, Jessica.
Hello.
How have you guys been then? What have you been up to? Aaron, what have you been up to this week?
Hello, fellas. I've been doing pretty well. I've been very busy. You know, I listened to the show last week, Neil, and I heard you demand an appearance by Mr. Blobby. And so here I am, man.
Oh, no.
I managed to show up. I know it's a secret code, brother. But no, I've been prepping for Christmas this week. I was telling a gamer there before the show that because I'm taking some time off, I've got to get all my driving in early. So I've putting in 800-900 miles in a week or 1,000 miles last week, trying to get all this stuff taken care of. So I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and catching up on everything. So if anything, I am up to speed on everything that's been going on. And it's an exciting time if you're into retro stuff, because it seems like usually at the end of the year it sort of peters out. But this year it's been going strong, brother. So it's exciting.
If Boat's to be believed, when I've spoken to him in the past, 900 miles is just kind of your daily commute in the US, isn't it? That's just it's just standard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the way we do it every day.
Chris, what have you been up to?
Well, first of all, if it's okay, I just want to give a shout out. I want to give it a shout out as well to my son, Zach, who had just finished his bachelor's degree in creative media, majoring in games art design, hence the relevance to this show. Wow. So that's what we're getting into. Yeah, well done. He already works as a 3D modeler and animator for a mining company, but obviously wants to get into the games industry. So if anybody has any contacts, let us know.
Minecraft, maybe?
Minecraft. No. Do you know what? That's what they cut their teeth on, right? God, I'll tell you. That and 3D Studio Max. But yeah, it's all good. Other than that, I did listen to last week's show, and Dave said he was interested in knowing if I actually played more in 24. Is that right, Dave?
Did you manage it?
I did, and I think it's because
such a big fan of the idea of playing more in 24. You really took my imagination with saying that, so I've been thinking about it all year.
Oh, I noticed that both of you have thought about it and not done it. I think I did. And let's be reminded, it wasn't my idea. It was Retro Bear. So, you know, he said it on his video on his YouTube channel, and I just sort of ran with the idea and we came up with the tag. But For me, I noticed, I just did a quick search on my channel. I did 22 videos with that tag, and that means that video was about gameplay. So that's just in what I did on screen. Behind the scenes, there was certainly more gaming than I took the time to video as well. But what I really enjoyed this year was finally involving family or friends in the hobby. So just some quick examples. PS2, which was a cheap pickup. My family loved getting into SSX and SSX Tricky. And I'd forgotten that my kids even played that back in the day. So they were instantly back into that. That PlayStation 2, when I first got it, was turned on every day when I came home from work. Before I got home, somebody else was playing on it, playing one of those two games. Well, that was fantastic. And then at my 50th birthday celebration, I set up a CD32, an Atari 2600, 6-switcher Woody, and the Atari 2600 Plus, and they were all in use by people of all ages. So that was just really cool. People playing combat, 4-player Warlords with 4 paddle controllers, and Banshee on the CD32. Just great fun. So for me, that's what it's about, is, yes, taking time to play myself, but involving others and just being social with the hobby as well. So, yeah, nice. Thanks again once again to the Retro Bear for coming up with the idea. It's been inspirational.
Speaking of social things, I don't always go into the cave on Saturdays now because I've got Dan running things for me. But I did happen to go in this Saturday because Hoffman was coming and I wanted to say hello to him. And got out my car, saw the people waiting to go in, and who should be in the queue? None other than Jeff Minter. Just completely unexpectedly there as a punter to come to the cave. So it was really nice to meet Jeff properly and have a chat to him. I bumped into him at Expos, but not really had time to chat to him in any great depth. So it was nice to have him there for the day. Incredible.
I'd have loved to have gone to the cave. You had Jeff, you had Giles, you had the guy I've forgotten his name. Gareth Noyce.
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah, he was there.
To see he made Secanoid that Hoffman ported. And Hoffman said he was delighted to see his game on an arcade cabinet. I mean, that must be incredible.
Yeah, and I also had a chance to play his new game, Gareth's new game that he's working on his Steam Deck, and it's a huge nod to the old games of old. It's isometric. It's got Jet Set Willy in there. It's got Ant Attack in there. It's got just every old game you can think of. There's a nod to it in there, so it's fantastic. Look out for that. AAA Games is the name of his company. A as in EH. A. Right. Is that everything about our week, Dave? Or have you got anything to share with us before we get into our first story?
Is he deciding if you're going to ask me or not? I did finish off.
Right, on with the next story.
I did finish this off. Look, it's now got a memory stick on it. You see there, memory stick? This is my
What's
Orpheus
this you're
2.
holding up? Orpheus 2 with memory.
The Gravis Ultrasound Super Mega card with absolutely everything on it. Yeah. I've been playing games all week. I've been playing Lords of Chaos all week. Can't bring myself away from it. I am at least finishing Playmore in 24, playing something. I absolutely love playing it. Thank you, Chris, for introducing me to that. But I've got a request. Holly has asked me to ask Chris for a slogan for 2025 because Playmore in 25 doesn't rhyme. You need to come up with something. You've got until the end of the show, Chris.
I'll think about it because what my plan for 25 is to be more creative with retro kit, but I can't make that friggin' rhyme. I've put some thought into it. So if anybody's got any ideas, so the idea is being creative with your old kit, and the year is 25. I don't know. Maybe we need to use a different language.
If you don't make it rhyme, that would be a crime.
Xbox Live in 25.
I'm a poet and I didn't even realise it.
You will come up with something.
Could be our question of the week, slogans.
That's a good one. That is a question of the week.
Yeah.
Slogan, a rhyming slogan for 2025 to make the best of our year.
Yeah, well, we'll flesh that out by the end of the show. Should we get into our first story?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's get right into it. Normally, when I see a YouTube video title, Retro Gaming has changed, then I'll pass on it thinking it's just drama. But this is actually a great reflection piece from Modern Vintage Gamer. He is, of course, a big voice in retro and probably the most prolific for sitting down and talking about his opinions to the camera rather than just talking about software and hardware.
More than you, Dave.
Yes, he's got a much bigger reach than me, even though I don't think I have any humility in my opinions. He's got a much bigger reach than me. So in this video, Dimitri talks about the changes over the last few years and how much things have changed, even though we might not have seen it happening. If you compare right now to, let's say, 7 years ago, things are dramatically different than what they were in 2017. But it's happened in little steps and slices, and we've got there. So I'm keen to speak about this week because we've got two people as guests that I really want to ask about this, but also because it's the end of the year and it feels like a good time to reflect. And because we talked in a recent episode about our favourite systems, and it got me thinking at the time that emulation is probably the first place to go if I was starting all over. Remember I said I would have a PC for emulation as well as a Mister sitting side by side before I bought anything else. So it's a 24-minute video, which is a monologue, so it's quite a lot for 24 minutes, but I do suggest you watch it. But here's what he covers. Now, before any of you come in, I'll cover what he covers, and then we'll have a right good chat about it and tear it to bits, with their opinions or not. So he talks about how good emulation has been in terms of almost everything not current that can be emulated. He also talks through the history of emulation and mentions emulators that I've forgotten about, and then like things like Nesticle and so on, the things we started on that we forgot about since, and of course the rise of MAME.
Was Nesticle the one where the mouse cursor was like a severed hand with blood dripping from it? Was that one?
I think it might have been. It rings a bell.
There was one, wasn't there? And you'd move the mouse, and there's like this blood splattered hand for absolutely no reason.
I remember, I mean, the ones I remember most are Multi-Gauntlet Emulator, because that's the first one I did, and the Capcom one that I've forgotten the name of, the CPS.
Callus.
No.
Yeah, Callus.
Callus. So I thought you said Alice.
Yeah. Callus. That was
Callus is the one. That was brilliant.
Callus.
Oh, Neil. He then on to the question, is it worth having real hardware? And that's how this was submitted to the subreddit by C3R7X with the title, Is Real Hardware Losing Popularity? He says it's still popular with the purists and the collectors, but it's seen a decline from what he's seen. He talks about how he used to collect hardware and isn't into it the same way, and his preference is to emulate these days. So let's put a pin on that in particular. We'll come back to it once we've talked about the rest of the video. Next up is FPGA and how it's doing more than we thought it would. I mean, this is right. I mean, when I got my Mister 5.5 years ago, it was stated as facts that it would never be able to do some of the chords that it does now. It just wouldn't be possible to do it. And of course, it has been doing it. And there seems to be no limits now to what FPGA will do. He says FPGA is what's going to replace vintage hardware. That's failing and too hard to do. And I get that there'll be drop-in replacements, but he said people will want that instead of vintage hardware. Next on to CRTs, and he says there's a decline in the popularity of CRTs. He no longer thinks they're as important. He says basically the old way of feeding a signal into flat panels doesn't work great, but a good upscaler in between will solve the problem. So upscalers will let you use a flat panel. And he also says, I think upscalers themselves have effectively replaced CRTs. Next is game collecting, and he talks about prices going up. He then says there's a decline in retro game collecting from back in 2017 to 2018, and he seems to have fallen out with game collecting himself, as he says he's got rid of about 2/3 of his games. He talks about arcade cabs, and he says that's not popular now either. He says it's gone back to being more niche, and the prices are just the same, but he talks about how arcade 1-up popularity has dropped, and that's certainly true. Arcade 1-up are struggling just now, but arcade prices are certainly not low. He goes on to community stuff next, and he talks about things like mods, cables, HDMI mods, power supplies, etc., and he rightly points out these things are better now than they ever have been. And the penultimate section is remakes, remasters, and ports, and I'm with him on this. So many games that I used to think you needed real hardware to play have now had a source port, a remaster or something, and they're just as good, if not better, as a way to play it that way. And finally, he concludes by saying things will continue the way he says, FPGA gaming coming in, etc. So I've got strong opinions in that, but I've been speaking for too long. So it's time for the Three Stooges to have their say. I'll start with you, Aaron, because you've been in this game for years now, and I know you've tried real hardware, emulation, and other things for your show, everything Amiga, and then you've done nearly every system that exists on ARG Presents. You give yourself such a short amount of time to do it. You just have to get it done. What do you think, brother?
You know, it's funny. I watched this video right when he released it, and I had to say, I feel uniquely qualified on this because I remember being on a BBS one time and seeing someone talking about a Game Boy emulator. And I didn't know what an emulator was. You know, I was on a BBS. I mean, it's a long time ago. And so I was there. I feel like I've been in the emulation scene since Jump Street, you know, and he mentioned Callus. There was many other old ones, like Rain was another one that emulated Rainbow Islands and a few of the games that Tato put out. And so, I mean, every time a new emulator came out, it was really exciting. And, you know, of course, then the dawn of MAME, and you could go out into the IRCs and wait for the announcement of the new games that were coming out. It was really, I mean, it was super exciting to be able to play that stuff at home. And so that carried me for a long time. I never had any idea that I would be, in fact, I never had any intention of collecting hardware. In fact, I thought that was stupid, if I'm going to the truth, because I was like, why would you do that? You know, but then something happened. It was even before we did the shows. I bought a master system off a guy. I never had one. And I was sitting there playing with it. I'm like, I could get into this, and this stuff's cheap. I'm going to start gathering some stuff up that I like, you know. And then the ball started rolling. And once we did the show, and you guys probably know this, doing videos and podcasts, it's just like a gateway to like make stupid decisions and buy crap there's no possible way you could ever want or need, you know. So I'm like, I gotta like to just sit within arm's reach. I've got a MSX and a Coleco computer here and all this crap everywhere. MSX is to beat the band. You can't play it all, but there's something to learning about having the hardware there. The funny thing is when the Mister came around, you know, when me and Boat have been doing Amigos, it'll be 10 years, I think, this summer with the anniversary. And we've been doing it long enough to see Amiga emulation go from not bad to like pretty much top shelf. I mean, early on, we didn't have an Amiga, so we had to depend on emulators. And so when the Mister came around, that really did change the game. But it's funny, I think about this now because emulation has been around for a long time, and they've really honed it quite nicely. But people love the FPGA, the Mister, and of course with the promise of completely perfect, cycle accurate simulation or whatever. I often wonder if that matters, to be honest with you, because I mean, if you load up your Raspberry Pi, most of the stuff you're going to play is indistinguishable from playing it on the Mister. I've done it, and so I think to myself, am I just whistling Dixie? Is the Mister just some kind of mental crutch that makes me have a more enjoyment? I mean, it's emulators are just as easy. Emulators are just as simple to set up as the Mister. But whatever it is, the Mister really did change the game, and it made it a lot easier to do shows like ARG Presents where we have to change computers all the time. In terms of what was in the article, I don't know. I can't speak on CRTs. I've been out of the CRT game for a long time because I didn't have the space. I've got one big one and a couple monitors. But when it comes to collecting like computer hardware, I think he's probably right. I mean, these things are finite, and the day's coming. You know, and no matter how many FPGA drop-in replacement chips or cap kits you put in, there's going to be a day where the thing's just going to turn to dust. You know, so we're going to be stuck with whatever we got. But I mean, I don't think the bottom's falling out on that. So I think there's still a decent collectible market for computers. I'm not sure that it will last forever. And someday they'll be just like Neil's got there in the museum. We'll just, you know, you'll go see him there. In terms of arcade machines, you know, when I've been around, I had an arcade machine long ago, and I've still got a couple out in the arcade. And they went crazy for a while. And I think he was dead on. I think people have sort of hit the wall on those. I haven't seen the price drop a lot, but I think it will. I don't know if that will happen to pinball because pinball is a more collectible, and you're talking big money, and pinball's still being made as well. So I'd say that will hold its value for a lot longer. And then lastly, in terms of collecting actual physical games, I always thought that was stupid too. And then suddenly I just started doing it. And if you look on the shelf behind me, I've got tons of box games back there. I don't know, man. The show is bad for me. I had to have Top Banana. I had to have Yolanda. I had to have, I like collecting garbage games for some reason. It's a thing for me. So I like to get those, plus Cinemaware, stuff like that. So for me, I'm collecting more physical games than I ever have. But I can understand how people would get out of that. But to me, that's a finite resource, and those won't go bad. You can just keep those forever. But it was an interesting, soliloquy he gave. I think the retro movement's strong. That's one thing we can all agree on. And there's been more work done in that area than there's ever been. So it's exciting to be here, but I don't know how much longer the physical aspect of it will be in play.
It's funny that you mentioned Yolanda because my Atari ST-FM was playing up the other day, so I swapped out with an SDE and I just wanted to test it for a while. I put Yolanda on. An hour later, I was still playing it. I got really... Well, you start and you're like, this game is brutal. And then you start to make a little bit of progress and you're like, okay, I'm finding the patterns. I'm finding the way. It does start to become rewarding, but... still frustrating, but there is a good game underneath that frustration. Yeah,
interesting. I'd never heard that.
Not a great game, but
people are not complimentary about anything other than the cover art.
Just before we started recording, I had a message from someone on Twitter, which is kind of a reflection of some of the direction this is going in. They've just released a game called Encounter on the Oric, for all those Oric owners, which is an upgraded version of a 1983 text adventure. And he said, here it is, you can download it, you can put it on your Oric and you can play it. Or here's a Steam code. And the Steam code just takes you to an emulator and this old game that you can play. And that's just an example of how accessible it's all become. Because emulators have been around for a long time, but as Aaron said, he's seen them evolve so much over the years, from sometimes a bit technical, a bit having to go into the menus and tweak everything, to something that's very much pick up and play, or completely packaged, ready to go, like a game on DOSBox from Good Old Games or something like that. A lot of work has been done to make these games accessible. If we park the popularity of everything for a moment and just ponder the experience, which is something I can talk about because of running the museum, I get to see people experience these old systems with CRTs, original arcade machines, original controllers, everything that goes with it, right down to the smell of warm electronics when I turn them all on. And every week people say, I forget just how good these games look on CRT. And that's just coming from the people that remember CRTs. Of course, there's a lot of younger ones who have never played these systems, never used a CRT before. And as time goes by, memories fade. Aaron talked about cycle accuracy. His memories are not cycle accurate. If he plays a game he used to play back in the day and it feels right, it feels right. And he's getting a good experience from it. Well, okay, sorry, wrong. That was an assumption. That was maybe he's overclocked now. I don't know. New generations come into the hobby. New normals are set. So some normals are set through the convenience, some through being priced out of the market, priced out of the hardware. But the desire to experience these old games is still there. And there are people who have no interest in fixing up old hardware. That's a niche within a niche. If you just want to get to a game, you do it through the path of least resistance, and that will be the path of least resistance. It won't be fixing up an old bit of kit first. And there's nothing wrong with that. Old hardware is going to become more scarce. Alternatives are going to become more normal. I don't think this is anything new, really. I think there's a lot covered in this video, but the general headline is older things are getting older, okay? And I honestly don't feel that different about emulation now than I did in 1989 when I first tried a ZX Spectrum emulator on an Acorn Archimedes. We used to play The Great Escape on it at school. Makes everything accessible. I loved hearing Aaron there just talk about the early days of MAME, because I too remember like every release. What are the new games you can play? Now it's like I've got no way of keeping track. There's thousands upon thousands of games and systems within MAME. But there was a really magical moment when each game was dripping out and you could go, I can play Mr. Do now. I can play, whatever.
Something with sound would be coming out. Like now it's got sound. Remember samples for Donkey Kong? It's like, yes.
So it's been a pleasure to be on that ride, and it's all a little less exciting now. But yeah, a lot of topics covered. I can't help but think if he makes this same video in 5 years' time, he'll probably come to the same conclusions. I don't know, Dave. What did you think about the video, Dave? And I know you did pick up on one very important thing, which I won't spoil. I'll let you talk about that.
I certainly found it interesting, and I broadly agree with what he's saying while disagreeing with him. In that, I want to come to it at the end after Chris, but I think he's not wrong, but he's also not right, and I'll come to it after Chris. I'll not cut Chris out.
The big ending, Well, keep us in suspense, Dave. What are Chris's thoughts?
I'm excited to hear Dave's thoughts. I think it'll probably be similar. I found the video quite interesting because, there's a lot of emotion I felt when he started talking about games collecting in particular and paring back his games, and it's almost like it sort of lost the passion is how it kind of came across in that particular segment. He's not got rid of everything. He's still got a vast collection of games, but he has started to sell off some stuff and pared it back. I've personally not got a massive collection, and that's been, purposeful from day one. I've collected things that I intend to use and that I have a nostalgic connection towards. But it's very easy to get caught up in I've got to get some more stuff for a pickup video, or I need more stuff on the shelves and blah, blah, blah. And I think that's where people get carried away and it just becomes filler. And I've already been looking at, even though I haven't got a big collection, I've been looking at what can go and what will stay over time. So things like the Commodore 64. So sorry, Aaron, or pretty much the rest of America, but I've sold my Commodore 64 because I have no nostalgia towards it. I've had a play with it. I've enjoyed it. Time for somebody else to enjoy it. I don't need it sitting on the shelf collecting dust. That's how I see this hobby. But what I'm also very aware of, and I wonder if this is what's at play with MVG, is what I call the whiskey effect. And that is, if you drink too much, it begins to lose its effect, and then it takes more to get that same buzz because your body gets used to it. And then so you end up at a juncture of, well, do I go more or is there no point to this anymore?
Is this a cry for help?
No, it's not. It's not. I'm fine. But I think the same thing is true with nostalgia. It is like a drug. And when I first got sucked into this hobby, and I didn't even see it as a hobby at the time, it was very emotional. But guess what? Now I'm surrounded in it. I've got all my toys. I've got my shelf full of games. I'm watching YouTube video after YouTube video after YouTube video on the same topic. And in all honesty, there's not the buzz because of the oversaturation. Does that make sense?
When we were younger men, we had no interest in this stuff. And then we started to get into it. And when you first started to think about things from 20 years earlier and see them again and really tap into those memory banks that you hadn't touched for years, there was a hit. There was a real hit.
Yes.
A real rush. Yeah. And like you say, you don't get that when you've completely immersed in it.
No, that's right.
When you've revisited Roland on the Ropes for the 100th time, it's not the same as the first time when you hadn't seen it for 20 years.
Yeah, so that's why I refer to it as the whiskey effect, because the more you do it, the less of an effect it actually has. And I think then it's a choice: is do you keep going or do you actually step back for a bit and become a cheap date again, where one or two drinks is enough? I think it's the same in a hobby like this. Do you stop watching some of the YouTube content? Do you leave the retro kit for a while so that after a couple of months you come back to it and you go, actually, yeah, far out, let's play Lotus 2 on the Amiga because I haven't done that for a while and it gives me the warm and fuzzies. I think there's nothing wrong with that, stepping back for a period. So this whole conversation that we're having, MVG's clearly going through, I think I see it as a cycle. in all honesty. He does talk about things like, you know, he didn't say the word, but he's really talking about the recreation hardware and the minis that run on software emulation. And he talked a bit about that. And that was one of the gateway drugs that got me in. And they're only making more of those. They're not making less. They're making more. And he talks about that as well. Well, guess what?
They're getting better.
And they're getting better.
They're getting better. Yeah.
And that's going to be the gateway drug for the next lot of people that don't even know this is a hobby. You know, we think we've touched everyone, but we really haven't. And there's going to be somebody else that goes into Argos and goes, flipping heck, you can buy a Spectrum again. And they'll get one as an impulse purchase, or it's been under their tree for Christmas, and they'll get back into it. And that will lead them into, oh, do you know what? It'll be great to have an actual one again. I wonder if you can still collect the tapes. And off they'll go on eBay, just like I did, just like you did, Neil, Dave, Aaron. I'm sure we all did the same. And the cycle will continue. And for some people, that will be a long journey. For others, it will be a short one. And they might cycle round and go, do you know what? I can sell all these games again. I'm happy with my emulation. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't think it's over. He did say over and over again, prices don't go down. Well, guess what? Prices are driven by supply and demand. So if prices aren't going down, there's still a market for it, so people are still collecting.
That's a really important point. Something I forgot to say at the start of the show, I'm still collecting, and I got this week. This is the very first game that I got for my Amstrad CPC. It's a disc compilation, and I got it for Christmas along with the Amstrad CPC, Manic Miner, Everyone's a Wally, Jet Set Willy, The Final Frontier, and American Football.
Beautiful.
Amazing.
Let down at the end there. A good compilation and American football.
I've been waiting to get this, trying to get it for years on eBay, and I finally got it.
Nice.
So, on to my thoughts on this. As I said, I mostly agree with him. I don't think there was anything really wrong in most of what he said, apart from the one thing where he says that interest is going down, and I think he's dead wrong there. He did work out something, though. He finally hit on something really important at the end, and I don't think he fully grasped the meaning of what he was saying. He said that retro gaming is bigger than ever. There's more people in the space and interested in it, and it's a good time to be in it now. I fully and totally agree with that. But what he misses there is there are just as many, if not more, people interested in real hardware, in CRTs, in real big box games, and Chris hit on it there. If the prices are holding up, that's what that means. We've raided our lofts. People have gone into the cache in the attics and got the Amigas down and listed it on eBay as rare and eventually sold it on. There's more Amigas and CPCs enter circulation now than there ever were before, and there's still demand for it. But that doesn't mean that everyone involved in retro wants them, especially as there's so many people involved in retro. I mean, if prices were a fraction of what they were, if you could go back to 2005 prices, if you could pick up a Falcon for buttons, if you go to a car boot sale and get an Amiga 1200 with all the trimmings for 20 quid, then there'll be more people buying them. The appetite for it is there, but prices are what stop people do it. Plus, of course, as the price goes up, the things like the Mister, which is not cheap. Misters are expensive to get. Even the Taki Udon, as cheap as you can get Amiga, is still, you can get Mister, is still not cheap compared to just running an emulator or compared to 2005 prices. So, yeah, I think he does miss that. And I'm just as interested now, I think, as I will be in 10 years as I was 10 years ago. I'll still be interested in it. One thing I remember saying to you, Neil, a while ago was, you're here forever and in this hobby because it's your job, and other people will drift in and drift out. And you might have noticed it on YouTube comments or on Discord that it's a different cohort of people all the time than it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. As people drift in and drift out, like Chris said, there's nothing wrong with that either. I mean, I might go through a patch where I don't play any retro games because I want to play, I don't know, Morrowind all over again, and I won't play retro games, but I'll go through a patch like I am now where the only thing I want to do when I finish work is play one particular game because I'm sucked into it. So, yeah, there we go.
Dave, you know Morrowind came out in 2002, right?
Are you saying Morrowind is definitely a retro game? It's a modern game.
I've said it's retro, Dave.
It's over 20 years old.
It's modern. It's modern.
It's over 20 years old.
one thing that wasn't mentioned, it was, he went into a lot of what I would consider modern emulation, and talked about how good it was. And it was quite a revelation to see someone running, PS2, PS3, or Switch or whatever. And I think that's the one thing that, when it comes to this conversation, there's no doubt that retro game collecting is going to go on, but it's going to change. It's going to change with every new generation. And I think a lot of the stuff that we hold sacred is probably eventually it's going to go over the edge of the falls. I was looking at the prices on, say, the Atari 2600 stuff. You can pick those up for a song. The cartridges are a song. Nintendo stuff's not expensive as you think. You can get Nintendo cheap. And I think eventually that stuff's going to just fall by the wayside. And maybe eventually you'll move right now, what's the new hotness? GameCube or N64 was the hotness a couple years ago. So I think there's going to be a natural decline in the prices on the older stuff, just by sheer fact that the people that own it are getting old or passing away or whatnot. And so that stuff's going to get recycled back into the market. And so it's just, you can keep the ball rolling on a conversation like he had forever, because it's always going to change.
Yeah, that's, I think, it might even be called the Elvis effect. All the Elvis memorabilia, so that if you think of when Elvis was popular, it was kind of 15 years maybe before retro computing really started, and 25 before it really picked up. As people began to pass away, all the Elvis memorabilia re-entered the marketplace, and it flooded it, and it absolutely trashed the value of it. So at some point, I guess that will happen. I don't think it's happening now, though. It's not happening now. It'll happen eventually.
The 30-year window. It moves.
Yeah. Anyone else anything to say on this before we finish and move on? It's quite an interesting topic.
No, but I can already tell this is going to be a long show, which is great. It's been a good topic, but we've got more stories to get through. So wrap it up, Dave.
Yeah. Let's wrap it up by saying watch the video. It's very interesting. It will provoke your thoughts. We are sponsored this week, thank you very much, by PCB Way, makers of PCBs, CNC milling, all sorts of stuff. Pick and plant. Pick and place. That's the one. Pick and place. And their amazing shared project library, which we always sing the praises of. Neil, do you like PCB Way?
Yeah. Where there's a will, there's a PCBway.com.
Oh,
do you like that?
Nice.
Merry Christmas, Elaine.
Merry Christmas, Elaine, yes.
And everyone, including everyone at PCBWay. No, thank you for sponsoring us, PCBway.com, for all your PCB and other thing needs.
Question for you guys. Did any of you back the Supersega FPGA project?
No.
Nope.
No, it's a no from all of you. Good. This is a project that was announced early in 2024, I think, as an all-in-one console. It's in no way officially licensed by Sega, and it would be able, they said, to play games from every Sega console ever released, excluding, I think, the Game Gear. That means it would have all of the cartridge slots for all the different types of cartridges, the optical drive, everything to support systems from the Master System, the Mega CD, 32X, Saturn, Dreamcast, and more. Riding in on a wave of optimism and excitement that surrounded FPGA-based emulation in recent years, it was welcomed with positivity and a healthy dose, I have to say, of skepticism, as this was the first project of its type to come from the Spanish team. Time Extension followed their plight closely. That's a website that regularly pops up with your contributions. So Time Extension, check them out. They regularly kept us up to date on the story, starting with updates from Christina Burgess, I think it's pronounced, who was handling the PR for the team, and also the eccentric Alejandro Martin, the lead engineer, who liked to be photographed in a bright orange Lamborghini. With a ballpark figure of around €400, they announced they would be taking pre-orders and you could reserve one for just €3, which seems like a low-risk move and a nice way to support the project. But that was until November, when payment was taken not for the €3 deposit, but for a full €375 plus shipping. In an example given by Daniel at Slopes Game Room, who follows these kind of projects with his Kick Scammers series over on YouTube. In his example, they took 420 euros from his account. Are any alarm bells ringing yet? Channels such as Gaming Esoterica have been taking deep dives into video releases from the team as they try to give credibility to the project and keep the money coming in. The highlight being when they show a PCB of the supposed working prototype, and people who know a thing or two about such things paused, freeze-framed the video, followed the tracks from the front USB port where the controller was plugged in, and discovered that the tracks go all the way to the rear USB port and pass through. So it's effectively an extension going to whatever is hidden behind the television, and they've got their controller plugged into that, allegedly. Other things that come up as well is that the placement of the RAM, according to those who know, is so far away from the supposed FPGA chip as to be useless. In short, it would be a Christmas miracle if this whole thing wasn't a scam. But it gets weirder. Our good friend Ian Lee, who appeared on the show a couple of shows back, managed to book an interview with Alejandro and has posted the video on YouTube, calling it the wildest interview ever. In it, he and co-host Catherine spend 30 minutes chatting to him. His English isn't great, which isn't something to hold against him, but the combination of broken English, him trying to cook his dinner, drinking, smoking cigarettes, it all adds to the comedy that unfolds on the stream. He talks us through the partitioning of FPGA chips and their logic using a cigarette packet, and then he shows us the prototype board, and for the first time, a world exclusive, he takes the heatsink off what he claims is the FPGA chip and then quickly says, I'm not an expert, when Ian starts with quite basic questions, really. And Ian also, he will confess he's not an expert on this, but he was getting some help from, because this was a live stream, so he had his live chat feeding him technical questions to ask Alejandro. It all falls apart pretty quickly with no real assurances to backers. And then it gets even funnier when Catherine, who has been largely silent for the duration, starts interrogating him in fluent Spanish. I didn't see that coming. In Spanish, he tells her, nobody's ever said to my face that it was a scam. Completely ignoring everything that's being said on forums and social media. But they haven't said it to my face. We learn that Alejandro is now setting up a crowdfunder to get more money. And surprise, surprise, he says that Sega is now legally chasing him. So it all seems to be very predictably steamrolling towards a line of, Sega have shut us down, we can't give you the money back, it's all gone to legal fees. It hasn't got to that point yet, but it just feels like it doesn't take a huge leap of imagination to predict that this is where it's probably going, and it will really shut down and the money will likely vanish. I think that's a prediction the bookies would give us good odds or short odds on, I think. What do you think, guys? Scam of the year? Do we need to make an award for such a thing, the Scam of the Year award? Or could something good come out of this? Dave?
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed watching Ian's interview. Alejandro is a really compelling character. He's really interesting. You can't help but like the guy who does an interview and cooks his dinner while he's doing the interview. Disappears several times to go and get a beer, lights up a fag, whatever on the thing. Absolutely wild. You'd love to have a beer with a guy because he just looks absolutely fascinating. However, obviously don't give him any money. Obviously. Now, a few things came from that video. They confirmed they've taken money from between 200 and 300 people. So they have like 100,000 euros in the bank from people. They do not have a working prototype. The board that he showed cannot work. He tried to claw back on some of the criticism by claiming the board is a 4-layer board. Doesn't look like a 4-layer board. There's almost nothing happening on the board on the top and bottom. Why would you have a 4-layer? 4 layers isn't enough, but why would you have a 4-layer board and then have everything happening in layer 2 and 3 where you can't see it? I don't believe that. The chip looked like a GPU to me, and it's clear that he's not telling the truth about it, which makes it one of two things here. Either he is an outright scammer, where his job is just to get money from people with no intention of delivering anything and to disappear with the money. And I don't think it's that. I don't think this is an outright scam. I think this is option number 2, where he's a bit of a blagger. and he's trying to get as much money in as possible and convince people with a board that is obviously fake. There's no point in this board other than to show people, yeah, give me your money, in the hope he can get enough money to then make the project actually happen. And I don't think he'll manage that. I think people will get told, I wasn't able to do it, updates will dry up, and people will be left without their money, have to claim it back. But I don't think this is a grab and run. I think this is just a fantasist who hasn't a clue how to do it, but thinks if he gets enough money, he'll make it happen.
You'd think the correct route, if that was the intention, would be to start from the outset with Kickstarter, surely.
I don't think people would kickstart this with any more than €3, sorry, because he's got nothing to show that's going to work. You'd be giving the guy €400 for something that he doesn't have a prototype for, he doesn't have the expertise for, he can't speak the lingo on, he clearly doesn't understand it, so the Kickstarter wouldn't work.
Doesn't Kickstarter require prototypes? I mean, I don't think you could start there, could he? Isn't that part of the deal when you go there? Don't you have to have some sort of working plan? That's why people go to the other ones, to the more shady Kickstarter programs. I mean, it sounds like this guy was going to, like you said, he was going to bankroll this thing and then hope he could figure it out on the back end. This has got like those Coleco Chameleon vibes all over it, including right down to the people doing detective work on the PCB in the video. If you haven't learned by now not to show, don't show stuff on the screen, because these people out in internet land are insane. They'll get in there and they'll diagnose everything, and then you're boned. I mean, you can't pull anything over on them, and you do not wish to feel their wrath, which this guy will now be feeling after doing this. I did catch some of this interview this morning, and that dude's entertaining. He's laid back, brother. I mean, he's drinking a beer and kicking back, having a smoke during the interview. But I think you're right. I don't think he intentionally went out to drop the hammer on a bunch of suckers. I mean, I think he did plan on suckering people. Mission accomplished. But I do think he probably figured he could come up with something. But I don't know how he thought he was going to get around the long arm of Sega. And he didn't, ironically, because I've heard this thing is pretty much DOA at this point. But I just wonder who would. Please be careful with your money, I guess, is the end result of this. Don't just give it out.
In particular, what stands out is the promise of Dreamcast through FPGA, because there isn't a Dreamcast core out there yet that I know of, certainly not publicly. So, he's going to have to come up with that as well. Just on Kickstarter, terms of service, Kickstarter doesn't offer refunds. Kickstarter doesn't hold funds on creators' behalf, cannot and does not guarantee creators' work, and does not offer refunds. So there's no protections there, which is why, as Aaron says, be careful with your money. It always pays to do your research on a Kickstarter. When I do them, it's only been for books, so something far less complicated, but I've always got at least to the last couple of chapters, so I can say, look, it's the last 10%. Just help me over the line, and then we'll get them delivered quickly. But others do take a very different approach. Yes, Dave?
Yeah, the reason why people don't go to Kickstarter themselves and go to one of the other ones is, I believe, because of Kickstarter's policy of it's funded or it's cancelled. Whereas if you don't meet the funding goal, you get nothing. Whereas other ones, I believe, you can still part fund and still go ahead with it, which isn't ideal. But this, I wonder if his plan is now to pivot and then produce something like the cheapest emulation device, system on a chip type thing he can do, ship that out to people and say, well, you got what you paid for, you're not getting a refund.
He's going to do that and support the Dreamcast. That'd be a trick right there.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you need to emulate a Dreamcast on. I mean, will a Pi do it?
Yeah, Pi 5 does it. Pi 4 does it to a degree, yeah.
So you're saying just abandon the FPGA altogether and just go with like a cell phone chip?
Yeah.
I don't think that'd get over with. I think the deal is done. I don't think there'll be anything shipped, and I don't think anyone will get their money back. I mean, why would you ship stuff now? He's got the money. Why bother? What are they going to do? Nothing.
He even says in the interview, well, if you want your money back, use chargeback, which I think that would assume you've used a credit card, wouldn't it? And you can't do that through a debit card, which, why should they?
You can in the UK. You do it through a debit card now.
If people ask you for a refund, give them a refund. Don't make them jump through all the hoops of using the bank systems. Yeah,
got that right.
Something else I noticed is that I believe the terms and conditions were you paid the €3 to reserve it, and then they would take full payment when they were ready to ship it to you. He's not ready to ship it to you. Why is he doing crowdfunding if he's taking the money? That doesn't add up. If he was ready to ship it, he wouldn't need crowdfunding. So it doesn't add up there either.
He wants the money.
Yeah, he's run out of cigarettes.
Look. Personally, I feel for the guy, right? I see what's going on here. You say he likes to have photos taken with his orange Lamborghini. If it is indeed his, I've only got a cheap Porsche, and my last trip to the garage set me back $13,000 Australian. So give the guy a break. He probably just needs a coolant change on his Lambo, and he needed some funds to cover the cost, right? So that's what's going on here.
He does admit in the interview with Ian that he doesn't have a current valid driving license.
So there you go. Probably got taken off him, right? Because his Lamborghini's too fast.
I think it was a taxi driving license he no longer has.
Okay.
Wait a minute. He's a cabbie.
Not anymore, he's not.
Oh, well, not anymore. Look,
but he's taking everyone for a ride.
Joking aside, this raises some questions. And again, when I first got back into this hobby, this is the kind of reason why I didn't jump on board with things like the Spectrum Next, which was a proper Kickstarter and a very successful project. But because I don't trust people out there, right? That's the kind of way I think. And so when I see someone like Kickstarter that I haven't been involved much with before, it's like, wait a minute, so I'm just going to give some money in the hope that they're going to make something? That just seems a little bit dodgy. Obviously, the Spectrum Next is a fantastic project, but this one here, I find it really weird that he can make it look like he's taking a €3 pre-order fee and then take out €375 or even more. I mean, that raises some serious questions from me. One, how does a platform even allow for that mechanism where you think you're paying one fee and then a massive chunk larger comes out instead? Also, what lies do people tell themselves to think that this is okay and it'll all work out in the end? Maybe, I guess, once you're that invested, you have to hope that there's something at the end of the rainbow and not believe you've been taken for a ride. Because if you did believe that, you'd start your own legal action, right? He says. And how is this guy not in jail just for that? And I'm saying this is just my opinion. I'm not a legal expert. I don't have the full background. But if the facts that have been presented are as they are, how is this guy not already facing legal, not just from Sega, but from the punters? Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's a bit regardless. So regardless for me of the hardware promises that have been made, the fact that he's done that just screams scam. But that's just my opinion.
I can't believe we didn't title this show The Spanish Inquisition.
It's a perfect opportunity. Nobody expected it.
Can do that.
Nobody expects that.
Oh, back to me. Yeah, okay. I think we're all pretty much on the same. Sorry, I was just thinking about that title. It was, I just quit while I'm ahead. I think we're all pretty much on the same page with where this is. Some a little bit more optimistic and forgiving than others. Of course, it is an unfolding situation, and we'll continue to keep you updated as details come out, no matter how hilarious they are. And hopefully, one day, the board gets into the hands of somebody. For example, I think Gaming Esoterica, forgive me if it's not you, but somebody I did say offered Alejandro $1,000 to get his hands on one of them. Somebody else offered to fly over there to have a look at the board. So he's going to have to cave at some point and let people see it, see the state it's in, or vanish. And my money would be on the latter, but we'll see how it unfolds. Links to this, Ian's interview, and everything else that we discuss in the show notes. Go and check it out.
It's housekeeping, yeah. It's housekeeping, yeah. It's housekeeping, yeah. It's Dave's housekeeping, yeah.
I'd like to welcome on two new patrons, Carlos and Jason. Thank you very much for signing up. And also, Raul, thank you very much for editing your pledge. It's much appreciated. Thank you very much. And where can people go if they want to join in and become a twirler?
You can go to patreon.com/This Week in Retro, just like our fourth new patron, Alejandro, has done this week. I think he's a great guy.
Can we get him on as a guest? Just don't mention Supersega when he's on.
How much did we charge him?
Get the money up front.
What money? Last week, we talked about Indiana Jones, and it caused a lot of replies about the game. It turns out the new game, of course, is made by the same people as Wolfenstein, but it's not a shooter. It's an action-adventure game, and loads of you are saying good things about it. So maybe it's back on the list for you. What about you, Neil? Is it back on the list for you?
It is about 40% downloaded. I've paused it for the recording of the show, so I will give it a go.
Oh, you bought it?
It is about 40% downloaded.
Aaron, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle.
It looks good, man. But man, I don't play that much modern stuff. I hate to live the gimmick, brother. But I don't have time to really dip my toe to pull that deep. Not when I've got a Christmas DOS show to get ready for. You know what I mean? So I'll get around to it after I put all these shows to bed one of these days. I'll come back and catch it. But it does look, it looks a lot better than the last couple films. That's for sure.
Chris?
Look, my criticism of modern Wolfenstein games is too many cutscenes and too much of the storyline and not enough running around shooting things. But that fits with an Indiana Jones title, so it's got my interest.
The people replying to us and talking about it have been, apart from I think one person, have been overwhelming in their praise. One person said there's a bit too much hand-holding, and you go here, there's an arrow, and you press X to do something, that kind of gameplay. But other than that, it's been really positive. On the same subject, we covered the video that we covered for Neil's story said that Raiders of the Lost Ark was the first licensed game. Both of us doubted that at the time, and I came in at the very end of the show saying Superman seems to be it. Superman is a licensed game, and it was licensed to come out along with the film just shortly afterwards because of the success. So it is a licensed tie-in, but that's only really part of it. It's got nothing to do with the movie itself other than the release date because of the movie. So it's not the game of the film. At the end of the 80s, we'd become used to proper movie tie-ins where the game was trying its best to be the game of the film. So RoboCop, Batman, and by then the rights of the game of the film were becoming a big deal. And of course, in the 90s, we saw some really big budget? Who's big budget? Big budget stuff like GoldenEye, like Star Wars, like Aliens, where there was really a lot of money to be made from licensing the rights to the game of the film. So, of course, the situation with Superman wouldn't be allowed to happen.
But how closely did that Atari 2600 Raiders of the Lost Ark game follow the film? If you're saying it's Superman's not quite right because it's not the same as the film story.
Nothing about it matches the film. None of the cover art, nothing. It's just a game called Superman that they brought out to tie in, and they paid the license for.
I played the Raiders of the Lost Ark game when it came out on the Atari 2600 because I'm old, and it was good. I mean, it did match the movie quite well, actually. And for an Atari game, it was really quite a revelation because it's a real kind of a sweeping adventure game, sort of in the style of a game like, I hate to say it, but like sort of like an E.T., where there's like there's a long puzzly thing. That game sort of gets buried. It's not the best, but I mean, I thought Raiders of the Ark was pretty good. And when it comes to games coming out, I think that game you talked about was 82. I know Poltergeist came out on the Coco in 82, so that's a real early movie tie-in as well. And it did also sort of fall along with the movie to a certain degree. So those are two that I can come off the top of my head that are in the same wheelhouse.
Yeah, the reason why that Superman got licensed is because DC were owned by Atari's group Warner. So that's why they were able to get the license for it. If we are going back to if we're going to say what I think we should be saying, the game of the movie rather than the Superman thing, which is a wee bit of a blip. If we're going to say the game of the movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark came out for the 2600 in November 1982, and L. Curtis Boyle, he who knows everything about the Coco, all hail, says that Tandy licensed and produced the game of the film for Poltergeist on the TRS-80 Coco, as you mentioned. You stole his thunder, Aaron.
That's right.
He says the earliest official date he's seen for it is the pre-Christmas flyer from 1982, whose sales ended on November 22nd, 1982, and these were usually put out a month in advance. So he says that Poltergeist was likely on sale in October, so it beats that. Also mentioned by people is Tron, which came out in August 1982, but for the arcade, and it was November for the Intellivision. Empire Strikes Back, though, was 1982, and Moby Games said that came out in July 1982 for the 2600. So that makes it the earliest, as far as I can see, the earliest game of the film with an official license. Of course, it's not E.T. either. That was rushed to come out in time for Christmas, famously, into 1982, a 5-week development cycle, apparently. And it's also not Alien, which was also November in 1982. So it looks like in 1982, publishers all of a sudden realized that video game sales would work if they tied it to a movie and bought the license. And I wonder if Empire Strikes Back is what did that, because it would come out in the summer, and if it sold loads and loads in the summer, there'd be a rush to license movies for Christmas 1982. So I wonder if that's the story. But thank you so much to everyone for commenting, for talking about it in Discord, and all the rest of it on the subreddit. Thank you so much, because, Neil?
Oh, I was just going to say, I've put a link. Sorry, were you setting me up to say something there?
No, Chris is laughing.
Did I
and you
destroy
were
the
jumping up and down. I thought, what have I missed?
I'll tell you why I'm laughing in a minute. Neil, go
Okay,
first.
I was just going to say I've put a link in the show notes for Duncan for the Poltergeist, because if you look up Poltergeist on the Coco, it comes up with Aaron demonstrating it on his show. So we'll put a link. We'll put a link to that in the show notes to go and see what it's all about. And it just got me thinking. I wonder what the longest gap is between the cinema release of a film. Let's go back to something like The Wizard of Oz or something like that, and a video game release. I wonder what holds the record for the largest gap between game and movie release.
There was a real appetite towards the end of the 80s to buy them that were for older films. I know some of our 16-bit games came out long after, but I bet you there's a big long one just by random that came out in 2014 or something.
I'd say Wings would be up there. Technically, Wings was in public domain by the time that game was made. But Wings was obviously a pivotal silent film movie with incredible stunts and whatnot. Now, I don't know. I don't think it really there's much of a plot following there. But I mean, theoretically, that's where they got the idea, and it's the same name, so maybe.
Yeah. I just want to finish off thanking our audience for the feedback on this. Absolutely fascinating. Really enjoyed it. Chris.
What I was laughing was, I got excited because Alien, I'm thinking there was Alien for the 2600, so I quickly looked it up. It's Pac-Man. Just with sprite swaps. It's just sprite swapped at Pac-Man. It looks terrible.
What were you thinking?
I don't know. Anyway, yeah, that's what I was laughing at.
We also talked about the remasters of Warcraft 1 and 2, and we had some reservations because they weren't quite hitting all the right notes. My friend Vanessa has let me know that Blizzard are still working on these. It looks like they might have just pushed them out to reach the anniversary deadline before putting all the polish they needed on them. So if you were interested but slightly put off, maybe take a second look. On to briefs now.
Hey, we're wearing briefs today. Let's talk about them. Bam.
Senor Buy 445 with a message to us and all twirlers. Happy retro holidays. And he's got a picture of a lovely Pac-Man ornament for the Christmas tree wearing a little Santa hat. Pac-Man with a Santa hat on, and I was thinking maybe if Namco had that idea, we wouldn't have Ms. Pac-Man, we'd have Santa Pac-Man instead.
Perhaps a good follow-up to talking about licensed games, as we just were, in the Christmas rush of 1982. A BBC News clip has been released about the battle for Santa's software. This was in 1984 and submitted to the subreddit by FAC_191. So go and check that out.
Sadly, Supreme turned up links us to a Facebook post from Acid Software, which explains that Mark Sibley passed away at the start of this month in December 2024. Martin made, among other things, Blitz Basic and Gloom.
That one made me very sad, actually, because I was hugely into Blitz Basic. Not when it was on the Amiga; I had a little tinker with it there, but when it was on the PC, and the thing that it did for me, having learned Basic and Pascal and C, and then trying to learn C++ and get my head around OOP, object-oriented programming, it was actually Blitz Basic that got me over the line in the end through particle effects in games and setting up each particle in a game as an object and then, making little explosions with particles. It was Blitz Basic that actually taught me object-oriented programming. I got really into it. So I was really sad to see this news. He's gone far too soon.
That was a powerful language, Blitz Basic, and you're only seeing its true potential even unlocked today. Because there are plenty of modern things that are being made on Blitz Basic. So his contributions, it can't be overstated. It's a sad passing.
It's not Christmas without CraftyLog6915, who links us to a video on what's called the last BBC Micro. It's the Acorn A3000, but I think this is the last one to have BBC on the little sticker, the case badge, before it switched over to Archimedes, and they were still using that BBC license.
Christ of Why Do You links a Time Extension article. Hello, Time Extension again. Hello, Damien in particular, which says that the fan-made Doom 64 for the Dreamcast port is now the definitive version of Doom to play. Now, I don't agree with that. The definitive version to play Doom is on a 486 DX266. And if you can get an SC55 for it, fine. If not, a Sound Blaster will do the job. But yeah, it seems to be a wonderful port to play.
I love the ongoing will it play Doom thing. But you got to remember, when the Dreamcast was out at the end of the 90s, Doom was old. Doom was old and Doom was boring at that point.
Yeah.
If you want to buy yourself a Christmas present, then why not buy yourself the Commodore P500? That's on eBay right now with a buy it now price of £2,519.99. It was a mistake by Commodore in the face of competition. It was supposed to be the P for kind of personal, I think it was, whereas the B was for business when it came to the Commodore PET. So it's sort of a wedge-shaped. You can see the evolution from that through to something like the Commodore Amiga 500's case. Obviously, a massive flop, very rare, hence the price tag. Go and treat yourself.
What was it competing with, Neil?
It was competing
with Commodore products.
Commodore's VIC-20 and Commodore's C64. Commodore's 900, maybe even. iHarbonaut 2020 links us to a BBC Scotland clip on the launch of the Rubber Keyed Wonder documentary. And it turns out that iHarbonaut 2020 worked on Chase HQ, which is in that. And I must say the Spectrum port of Chase HQ is excellent. One of the best on the platform, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Up with Rainbow Islands, that's the two arcade ports that are fantastic on it. Maybe there's more. There's loads more stories in the subreddit. And while we're not here for the next 2 weeks, you will be able to go to the subreddit and catch up on news and amuse yourself if you have a spare 5 minutes while you're doing something, which we won't mention. Also, 2 weeks without us, and patrons will get, probably early in the new year, an end-of-year wrap from Neil, and I will sit down and have a wee chat with you. But
got to
everyone else...
write the lyrics first, Dave. Got to write the lyrics.
Yeah. We will join you on the 11th of January with our next episode after a 2-week break. And hopefully, if Duncan gets time, he will release the annual tradition of the outtakes for you to have a good laugh at us all at. And remember all the wonderful things we've done this year.
Carmageddon for PC was originally released in 1997, well within the life cycle of the Amiga, which never died, Dave.
Never died. Alive and well.
Yes, but oddly, Carmageddon never made it to the Amiga, and hence I don't know, but that means it never featured glorious hard-panned stereo sound. It might have never been ported because the only people using the Amiga in 1997 were people in the TV or movie industry, and they were too busy actually working on fun projects like TV titles or making Titanic the movie.
Babylon 5. Babylon 5 was made in Amiga.
And Babylon 5. The pilot episode. Yep, at the very least. But what would they have been using? Wouldn't have been an A500, that's for sure. Probably an Amiga 4000 with all the fruit. And given I'm not into big box Amigas, even though I'm an Amiga fan, I actually can't comment on that too much. Other than that, they'd have had all the RAMs, all the accelerators, 060s, and some things hanging out of every single Zorro slot you can think of. What was I rocking around that time? Well, I had a generic small tower with a Pentium 100 in it. Carmageddon ran poorly. We kind of forget that Can It Run Doom for a while became Can It Run Carmageddon before it then became other things like Can It Run Quake, Can It Run Crisis, and that kind of thing. But it was playable enough for my wife Nikki and I to enjoy it, and for her to play it so intently, and I'll never forget this, that she broke the steering wheel controller that I had at the time whilst trying to run over pedestrians. I do most of the driving. I later ripped the guts out of that PC case, and it became a P200 MMX and Carmageddon then run. Still fairly poorly, I think. And I recall having this conversation with a guy at work who was also struggling to make the game run as smoothly as we wanted, and conversation about graphics cards began. And really, it wasn't until Carmageddon was given a 3DFX patch that things really came to life. And so it was a Voodoo Banshee for me. That was the final piece of the hardware puzzle that made Carmageddon enjoyable. But by that time, in all honesty, I've moved on to playing things like Unreal and Unreal Tournament. But Carmageddon remains a game and a franchise that I love and I occasionally return to. And of course, I love my Amigas. So I'd love an Amiga port of Carmageddon, right? Well, thanks to Bajako6502, we're now aware that someone is attempting just that. On itch.io, a user called Arczee has released a work in progress of Carmageddon for the 68,000 based Amigas. There's a download which includes the demo game assets, but he or she, I have no idea, states that you need the assets from the original full game if you want to play the full version, and there's an LHA to download of the Amiga assets as well. And there's a video of gameplay on the site which looks, and more interestingly, sounds just like the PC version. And when I say sounds, I'm talking including CD quality music and all the sound effects all the time. And it's stereo, but it's not hard panned from what I could tell, Dave.
It's more. I hope that doesn't disappoint you too much.
Interesting. It's interesting, isn't it? It's definitely still in stereo. There was certainly some things happening left and right, but most of it seems center. Can be done. Clearly, unlike projects like Dread or Grind or whatever it's now called, Carmageddon isn't going to be running on your 1 megabyte A500. But guys, what do you think? Beefy big box beasts with an 060 and all the RAMs. Is this even possible to play Carmageddon? Neil?
Well, yes, because you've just told us it is, Chris.
Apparently, I've not seen it.
End of story.
I've only seen a website.
See you in 2 weeks' time, folks.
I think we've got similar memories, Chris, because I perhaps had a beefier PC than you at the time, because Carmageddon was enjoyable for me when it came out with software rendering. The frame rate must have been acceptable to me because I don't remember great pain with it, but an acceptable frame rate on a 3D game on the PC in the mid-90s is not what you would consider acceptable now. That's changed a lot. I also had a Voodoo 1 and then a Banshee. And the moment that 3DFX patch went on it, it became a different beast altogether. Not just the frame rate, but the resolution, the visual clarity, the draw distance, everything that came with it. And from that point onwards, between Carmageddon, Tomb Raider and EF2000, software rendering was dead to me. I wanted everything to have a 3DFX patch from that point on. So this new Amiga port has been made possible thanks to the reverse engineering, I think, of the original game and the open sourcing of that code with a project called Death Race. That's DETH Race, not Death, over on GitHub. And I'm watching a video of it here running on a PyStorm accelerated Amiga. First of all, at a very poor frame rate in a high resolution, but then it seems pretty acceptable when they switch to low resolution mode. Yes, Dave?
Do you remember when we covered Death Race on this show and Duncan produced that wonderful, wonderful thumbnail of you in the game with the reds? Oh, that was brilliant. Duncan, use that again if you still have it, please.
So what we've got here is a native 68,000 port of Carmageddon that requires an emulated CPU using modern hardware to make the system fast enough to really run it properly. It's fun that it exists. Obviously, it does run on an 060. It does run on period authentic hardware at 4 or 5 frames per second from what I can see. It's really where the Amiga should have been if it wanted to compete in 1997. The PC got it. The Apple Macintosh got it in the same year, 97. It runs great on an iMac. I've got it in the cave. This was the cutting edge of gaming in 97, and it's where the Amiga should have been. It's taken 27 years, but it's kind of got there with an ARM processor strapped on. I'll allow it. Aaron?
You know, I loved Carmageddon back in. I mean, I love this game. I played the crap out of it. I put in the sound pack so my guy would sound like Ash from Evil Dead, and so all the sequels I played. I still, in fact, it's on my hard drive right now. I've always enjoyed it, and we used to network it up and play games with it when when you could do that stuff. I love that stuff. And so I got excited about this because I would like to see this on the Amiga. And I was long gone. I sold my 1200 off in 93 or 94 because I could see the writing on the wall. And, of course, I was also here in the States where no one knew what the heck I had. And so I'd already had a PC by then. And you're right, we were used to lower frame rates back then because I played this early on. And it ran like a slideshow, but I stuck with it until I got something that could run it. It's a great game. I would love to see something like this ported over to the Amiga to the point where you can play it without having a gimmick stuck in your Amiga. I don't have an 060, and I'm not going to break it out to play this. I mean, like you said, it's sort of a novelty. It's okay. I mean, good for that guy, but I don't see a point where you're going to be able to play this on something that's even remotely you could call a normal Amiga. But still, I will say I enjoyed seeing it come back. It's nice to see that people are still talking about this game and playing it. It was pretty controversial when it came out. But, man, it's one of those games where you'd have your buddies all gather around. And you'd be like, watch this. And you'd run over a mime or whatever, and you'd laugh or hit a cow. It was always a good time. So it did remind me of how much I enjoyed the game.
Can you remember, Aaron, in the US, did it ship with zombies as default, green zombies, or did you have full violence out of the box?
Oh, it was full violence, brother. This is America, man. We're running over suckers. People pushing baby carriage, cows, everything.
Yeah, UK it was zombies until they were allowed to release the patch. That's right, isn't it? I can't remember what happened. I don't know what happened in Australia. I didn't live here at the time, so maybe somebody can fill us in the comments or the subreddit.
Just kangaroos and roofies.
Kangaroos jumping out, and you were definitely allowed to run them over.
I missed Carmageddon when it came out at first because by the end of the 90s, the only game I was playing on my PC was ZMUD, which was my MUD program to play online games in text. I didn't have an accelerator until maybe around the year 2000 when I got a higher end Radeon. So I missed this kind of thing, and I wouldn't have played it, although it's great fun until after I got that. And I did play it then, and it is good fun, but I didn't play it at the time.
Will you be playing MUD this Christmas?
No, I haven't played MUD for years, and I couldn't let myself play one because I would get right back into it. I might play though, Neil. Finish the joke.
It'll be lonely this Christmas, Dave.
Yes. Yes. So I did some digging in this because I've got a reason to do some digging. I happen to have a rather good Amiga. Oh, no.
That's right, he's digging.
Well done, Neil.
I'm just going to mute myself.
I have a rather good Amiga. It's a 1200 with a TF1260, a terrible fire made by my friend Stephen. And I recently got a new CPU for it. I have a Revision 6060. So this is the daddy. This is the one that means my Amiga will go at a blazing fast 100 megahertz. You don't get anything faster than this with a real Motorola type thing in it, which makes it many, many, many times faster than a normal Amiga. However, reading a post on EAB from someone with the same configuration as myself, They report that with the new patch of Amiga Carmageddon, which improves the performance, they get a blazing 3 to 5 frames per second on it. I'm not playing it with 3 to 5 frames per second. That means you need a Pi Storm or an emulator to play this. And I don't want to take anything away from the guy that made this, because taking the death race to the Amiga port of it, fantastic, well done. But I don't think, I fear this makes people think that opens up the world of Carmageddon to the Amiga, which it doesn't really. And it's a shame, because I think people might get disappointed. What I would say is Dark Forces, the port of Dark Forces to the Amiga, that's fantastic. That runs great on an accelerated Amiga, and it feels like the kind of thing the Amiga could have done, rather than this, which is a bit kind of like, well, technically it can run it, but not really fast enough. So I would suggest people get Dark Forces instead.
Maybe its time will come when we finally get the Amiga Next or whatever comes along. So maybe Carmageddon.
That was the X5000, wasn't it? The PowerPC based X5000.
Oh yeah, you're right.
I know.
Yeah.
But just thinking about it, to put a 100 megahertz 060 in an Amiga, you are increasing the CPU speed of that machine by more than 100 times, right? Imagine being able to do that on a modern PC. And that wasn't exclusive to the Amiga. You could drop in those kind of upgrades in an Atari ST or a Mac. But yeah, you just don't get that kind of jump in performance anymore, do you?
Yeah.
Anyway, a tangent.
It's a good one. At least Dave is probably the only one among us that has an Amiga that can play Alien Breed 3D2, and I'm quite jealous.
You can come visit me and play it.
I will come visit you again. I'm just not sure when. So, I mean, it is a bit of a cunning stunt to get Carmageddon working on the Amiga. An Amiga that never existed, Dave. And I'm sorry, but I'm actually going to cause max damage to my reputation in the Amiga community. But for me, Carmageddon was a PC game. So I kind of don't see the point of playing it on an Amiga. So in my nostalgia-driven hobby, that's what I'll play it on, as a PC. Or, actually, I'll go against that, the PS4, which has a fantastic modern rendition. But as
it's okay
always,
on a PlayStation, but not on an Amiga.
Shush, we're closing.
We're
running. It's been a long...
flawed.
On the PS4, though, the 4 doesn't indicate the frame rate.
No, it does not indicate the frame rate. But look, at the end of the day, and this was my closing point in the notes, I'm not just saying this because of what Neil just said. It is kudos for, the people that have gone into making this possible, because it is quite a feat, even though that kind of Amiga never existed.
It's time now for our community question of the week, which every week is pinned to our subreddit, reddit.com/r/This Week in Retro, where you can post stories that you think may interest us and our community. We might pick them up for the show, we might pick them up in briefs, but you can just enjoy them on the subreddit at all times. And the question this week was, what's the greatest or worst movie tie-in game that you've ever played, and why? So let's bring that up. I just made a little note to say that one of the... Go on, Dave.
You missed out Duncan's comment there. Duncan
That's my
doesn't get
comment.
to say very much. Was that your comment?
Yeah, I've put my name next to it. Oh, no, I don't see Duncan's comment. Where is that? Is that on the actual subreddit?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's in the topic there, yeah.
So Duncan says, does anyone remember Biggles?
Duncan.
I could never get on with it. I remember Biggles because I remember, as I do with most of my games, picking up the box in a HMV or something like that in London for my Amstrad
swapping the price sticker.
Not on this occasion. Not on this occasion. That was only on 4D Sports Boxing. And it was one of those situations where I was out with the family. And so, of course, I had the game then burning a hole in my pocket for 3 days before I could get home and actually play it. And it's a very odd game, Biggles. You're kind of running along rooftops. I think there's a flying scene, but I could never really get past the rooftops. Ugh. Did you have it, Dave? Did anyone else?
Don't bury the lead here. You did a price swap, Neil?
We've talked about this before. When I was a kid, I figured out what barcodes were for.
Oh, and, man, illusion shattered.
Hacking the system.
Yeah, I didn't have enough, and I just had to have 4D Sports Boxing. I mean,
oh yeah,
you had to have that game.
Next time I go to the cave, I'm going to price swap some merch. That's what I'm going to do.
And my mum actually listened to the show when we talked about that as well. So got in trouble. Anyway,
Mum.
So our top answer comes from Richard Shears. He says, the greatest for me split between Dark Forces and Balance of Power. Star Wars does Doom perfectly, and Star Wars does Wars Around Stars perfectly. Loved playing this even more than the original TIE Fighter or X-Wing. The worst, he says, Doom. Yeah, not only did they not wait and have the cheek to make the game before the film, but they didn't even make it as crap as the film. Quite the opposite, in fact, the audacity.
Nice.
Oh, there's a Balance of Power, X-Wing v TIE Fighter. Dave's holding up.
Richard says, wanted to make sure people knew what he meant by it. It's the X-Wing v TIE Fighter came out without a campaign, without a single-player campaign, and that was a single-player campaign for it.
Okay, because there was another game just called Balance of Power, which is nothing to do with Star Wars whatsoever.
No. Yeah.
And Richard finishes by saying, I know RoboCop was the greatest movie tie-in ever. I only got to play it for 5 minutes around a mate's house before continuing on my way home. And that's Richard. Who wants to take the next one? It's a familiar name. I think Aaron should have the next one.
Are we talking about DJ Chris Fury here?
No, I'm talking about Paul, aka Hermsky.
F5, Aaron, because I've taken it out of contest mode now. So if you hit F5,
I see. Okay, gotcha.
I know Hermsky's, a regular.
I know him all too well. The Great Escape was, and still is, a top-notch game. The immersive, imaginative experience of stealth around a prison of war camp. I never completed the game, as I always got distracted by doing my own thing. A day in the life of a prisoner. Oh, the worst. That's easy. Highlander on the Specky. What was that all about? he's not wrong.
It's all about money.
That's true.
Chris, do you want to take the next one?
Sure, as long as it's Biscuit. His worst is Dick Tracy on the C64. The developers couldn't be bothered to finish it, so why should I? Fair enough.
Fair enough. And Dave.
Christ of Why Do You says 15 comments. He's talking about how many people had commented before him, and I don't think anyone mentioned GoldenEye 64, which I think is a game that so many people have fond memories of playing versus each other in the same room. Quick story, me and my friends were waiting for weeks to see it in Blockbusters. It was always rented out. I forgot about that. Remember when you went to get a movie and you couldn't get it? Imagine that on Netflix now. You press play and it says, nah, sorry, and left.
Someone else is watching it.
Until one Friday afternoon, we saw the case on their shelf, meaning it was available for rent. And on the way to the counter, all of us beaming with excitement, I realised I'd forgotten my dad's Blockbuster card.
No.
None of us had membership cards ourselves. I thought one of my mates was going to punch me. He was livid. It was a few more weeks before we finally did rent it. We all eventually bought the game for ourselves, and I was eventually forgiven. Great days.
Brilliant game.
There are a few more people. Disastrous Time and someone else who I can't see now also mentioned GoldenEye, so that does start to come up more and more. Ghostbusters gets plenty of mentions in these answers.
Batman
the movie on the A500. Hell yeah.
Movie. Hudson Hawk comes up several times as a bad one. I'm going to throw in there because I can't see that anyone said that. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Have you ever played that on the Amiga?
No.
Looks amazing. Plays horribly and just horrendous loading times, as I recall.
How well is Jessica Rabbit drawn? I'm asking for a friend.
Come on. Here's one. Earlier on, we're wondering what was the longest gap between a film coming out and the game, the licensed game for it. And someone's mentioned one. Frosty Cheesecake has mentioned The Thing on the PS2. So The Thing was a 1982 film. So he says it captures the atmosphere of the Carpenter movie brilliantly. I've played it through a few times, but even still, I'm tempted by the recent remake. So the PS2 would make it a lot of time after the film was released.
Okay, that can be the benchmark and the foundation of our new question of the week this week then. What is the biggest gap between a movie's release and the game of the movie? I think this could be a really interesting one.
Are we going for that a question of the week, or are we just asking people to answer that and then asking a different question?
I think that can be our question of the week. Unless you want it to be,
because I'm not sure that people will be able to share their own experience about that. I thought we were going to ask the question that we thought about right at the start.
What was that?
Which I've forgotten. Then we said that was going to be question of the week.
That was talking about the gap, wasn't it? Originally, I had what was the biggest scam, in your opinion, in retro gaming history.
No, even before that, right at the start, we said we'll make that question of the week.
Well, Duncan will know.
This week's question of the week is, what did we say at the start of the show would be this week's question of the week? Because none of us can remember.
You can choose which question of the week you answer then.
And I'm the only one drinking.
A bit of chaos.
Okay.
200 episodes, huh?
Oh, yeah. Have we said Happy Christmas once this episode, by the way?
200's enough.
It's also a Christmas episode. Have we done anything Christmassy? Happy Christmas, everyone.
I'm wearing a Santa hat. Aaron's wearing a Santa hat.
I'm wearing...
You're all wearing jumpers apart from me. And even Aaron, too, is wearing a Santa hat.
Merry Christmas, you filthy animal, on my T-shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Time now for this week's question of the week, which carries on the movie theme. What is the biggest gap between the theatrical release of a movie and the video game release? We had The Thing there as a benchmark. I'm sure you can think of some bigger gaps, or just, I don't know what I'm talking about. Bigger gaps. I was going to say or shorter gaps, but that wouldn't make any sense whatsoever.
Then it becomes this week's question.
The show doesn't normally go on this long. I'm losing it. The show's not normally this long.
This week's question of the week: how many games use the 060? 1.
Chris, can you do the question of the week, please?
No, I have no idea what it freaking is. No.
The movie one.
The movie one?
Yeah.
No. What was it? Shall we write it?
You could ask, like, what is your fondest memory of the 200 episodes? Are you guys not going to do anything about your 200 episodes?
That's a good one.
That's a big deal. Come on.
There's Christmas. There's.
Okay. God, I'm glad there's an expert here, a professional. Right. That brings us to our question of the week this week. Show number 200.
Fourth question of the week.
Yeah, okay. We may have had a few edits here while we figure out the question of the week. We're that professional. Imagine how good we'll be after 400 shows. But it's been 200 shows, and we'd simply like to ask you, what's been your favourite moment from the last 200 shows? Anything stand out? Let us know. Reddit.com/r/This Week in Retro. And of course, we would like to wish you all a very, very happy Christmas. Dave, were you about to jump in there?
I've remembered what the question of the week we were going to ask was, what's your slogan for 2025?
Oh, okay. Well, let's do that in the new year. That can be a new year.
Yeah, good one.
Yeah,
good idea.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Okay, so we're sticking
Chris, what's your slogan for 2025 that rhymes?
That rhymes? I don't have one.
We'll come back to you in January.
In January. Ask me again in January.
So a huge thanks to Aaron for joining us. Check out the links in the show notes to his many shows. Chris, who you know, but do, if you haven't already subscribed to his YouTube channel, go and check him out as well. Subscribe to his show. Dave, Merry Christmas, mate. The listeners,
Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you all.
The twirlers.
And a big Merry Christmas to Boat as well, who isn't here today, but he's always with us in spirit. The founder of the show, 200 episodes ago. And have a great time, everyone. We'll see you on the other side, and we'll have that outtakes show in the middle. And of course, a very happy Christmas to Duncan. Happy Christmas, Duncan.
Happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas, twirlers. See you next year.
They're waving.
Bye.
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 This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave, Chris from 005 Agema, and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.